always talk to somebody if you need to. Just so you know a little bit about myself before I talk about child protection. I'm the CEO of In Safe Hands. I set up this company a long time ago now. In a previous life, I was a detective in the police service where I worked for 20 years in child abuse units. I've done some study in psychology and criminology. I do numerous investigations to the Department of Education in early years sector. So I definitely know the points and some of the things and the problems that we see raising in early childhood. So hopefully I'll be able to touch on them and making sure that everybody understands how we should be doing things in our setting. Now, before we go any further, I do have a message here from your CEO that I'd just like to play for you. So I'm just going to push this video just from Anne. So just bear with us, listen to Anna, and then I'll take back over again.
Thank you for joining today's Child Safety and Protection Refresher Training session. As the CEO of OAC, I want to reaffirm our unwavering commitment to provide a safe, nurturing and inclusive environment for every child in our care, and this training is essential to equip you with the knowledge and confidence to manage child safety effectively at your campus. We really appreciate the dedication you bring to your roles, especially during these challenging times when media attention and regulatory scrutiny have really intensified. Remember, we do this work because we are passionate about children and their well-being. Our goal today is to provide you with the skills and awareness needed to keep both the children and you safe. Please engage fully with the training and don't hesitate to raise any questions after the session to your campus director or regional operations leader, as they're here to support you. Thank you for your commitment to child safety each and every day.
Okay, and obviously just the other thing about housekeeping that I just need to make sure everybody's mindful of. If you do have any questions through tonight, I have turned off everybody's video and microphone just because we have so many people online, it can get a little bit messy. So please use the chat room. If you have any questions, please type them into the chat room. Just remember I am male, so I struggle to do two things at once. So if you type a question into the chat room, I promise you that I will get to it, but it might just take a couple of minutes before I have a chance to look at it and answer your question for you. So tonight, this training was specially put together for you, and basically it covers off on a whole heap of different processes. Basically everything from understanding your legislative requirements in New South Wales when responding to child abuse, understanding how we protect ourselves and how we can respond to children effectively within our environment, and if we do receive a complaint or we think that we've come across an issue, how we ensure that we follow our processes that we have in place at your services, and that goes a long way to ensuring that we actually create what we call a child-safe environment. So we're going to have a look at all of that, and then hopefully make sure that everybody has a little bit of understanding about what we can and can't do. Now, I've just had one of the services say that they can't hear me. Can everybody just, can somebody type in the chat room if you can hear me, please? All right. Okay, thank you everybody. Obviously it must just be an issue with that service, so I'll let them try and work that out with their microphones and speakers, because there's not too much I can do from here. Alrighty, so when we talk about what we're going to do now is that we're going to have a look at legislation. Now in New South Wales, there's three pieces of legislation that can also do things that we talk about how you respond to child abuse. The first one is obviously our state-based legislation, and then you have federal legislation, and then we have our civil law, which is basically our duty of care that we provide children. So what we're going to do is that we're going to have a look at all three of them so you understand how they impact upon you and what your requirements are under each one of them. Now, the first thing we're going to look at is the state legislation. Now, in New South Wales, that's the Children and Young Persons Act. Now, basically that act was fundamentally developed to support government agencies investigating child abuse. So it gives basically our Department of Child Safety, our police services and the courts all their processes and powers to ensure that the state can keep children safe when they step in and investigate anything around child abuse. It also provides further ongoing case management. So if we have a child that goes into the care of the state, then there's case management processes that the government's allowed to use. So utilising foster care and those sort of processes are all found within that Act as well. Now, the Act obviously is quite big, and there's only a little bit of it that actually relates to you as an educator. A majority of that is all around mandatory reporting. So what we're going to do is just make sure that everybody clearly understands in New South Wales what your requirements are around mandatory reporting and when does your mandatory reporting require you to report it to the government. The first thing that we want you to understand is that in New South Wales, a mandatory reporter is any educator. So that's a teacher. So if you're a registered teacher and you're in early years education and you're part of a kindergarten program, then you are a mandatory reporter. And also goes to early years educators, outside school hour care, educators, family daycare, and home-based carers. Now, when we talk about early years educators, that also includes assistants. So it's important that we understand that. It doesn't include your maybe bus drivers or cooks or administration officers, but it's really important that we understand that there's still processes, and that's why we have child safe standards in place to ensure that we have a process in place in our service that if anybody comes across anything that they believe a child's at risk, then we have a process of reporting those processes. So it's important that we also understand that when we're talking around mandatory reporting. Now, what do we have to report in New South Wales? So Section 27 of the Act. Now, we'll read this and then I'll go into explaining it to you a little bit. So when we talk about mandatory reporter, it basically says that if a mandatory reporter has reasonable grounds to suspect that a child is at risk of significant harm, and those grounds arise during the course of or from the person's work or role, it is the duty of the person to report as soon as possible the name or the description of the child and the grounds for suspecting that the child is at risk of significant harm. Now, when we read that, it doesn't seem too difficult to understand, but I guess the problems for all of us to understand is that the Act is written and it uses very descriptive words. So when we talk about descriptive words, it uses reasonable grounds, a child at risk of significant harm. So all of those words, if I was to ask all of you to write down on a piece of paper what you believe significant harm is or reasonable grounds is, every person would write down something a little bit different. It'd be based on your own personal opinion, what your beliefs are, religious, cultures, all of those sort of things impact upon the way that we respond to things. And I guess it's really, really important that right at this point, I really emphasize the point of communication. You know, we never want an educator to ever form this kind of process by themselves. You're not a family daycare operator where you're working by yourself. You're working in a structured environment where you have processes in place to support you. So whenever you have any type of concern that's raised in front of you, it doesn't matter how minor it is, it always should be your catalyst to ensure that we communicate and document our concerns. If we do that, then the process of deciding whether if it's significant risk of harm or whether there's reasonable grounds or did it happen in the course of my work will kind of take place during those steps when you're utilising more senior people. So our management, our regional coordinators and our head office to support us ensuring that when we do have a concern, that people are supporting us to ensure that we provide that child all the support that we need to make sure that we're taking all reasonable precaution to protect the child from harm. So it's important that we understand that process. But if we had to decide all of these things by ourselves, it's important that we kind of understand what some of those terms mean. Now, when we talk about what a child is actually at, when is a child at risk of significant harm, The Act kind of gives us some guidelines around that. So the first one is basically where you believe a child or young person's basic physical or psychological needs are not being met or at risk of not being met. So basically we're talking around neglect. Now remember, around neglect, it's really important that we understand that the child actually has to be suffering something. So what we mean, or about to suffer things. So just because a child may not be being bathed or they're wearing dirty clothes doesn't necessarily mean that they're at that risk of a high level, because there's no law saying that you have to wash your clothes. There's no law saying that you have to wear clean clothes. If it's a lifestyle choice that family undertakes. So what I mean by that is if the parents come in dressing exactly the same way, they smell, they don't wash their clothes very often, and that's a lifestyle choice, then it's okay for people to live like that as long as the child doesn't suffer something. So if the child all of a sudden has basic physical processes, so where they might have sores or they might have urinary tract infections because of the way the family's living, then that's where it meets this risk of significant harm. So it's all about us understanding that. The second point there is parents or caregivers have not arranged necessary medical care for the child or young person. Now, we have to be a little bit careful about that because obviously when we're talking about young children's fairly, if we got nappy rash, obviously we're not expecting a parent to take their child straight to the doctor around nappy rash, but the medical care should be working with you about applying cream. It's all about us just making sure that parents are taking appropriate action. So if the child's saying something sore or their arm's sore and we think that the parent should be taking it to a doctor and getting an x-ray, well, if that's what you're thinking, then it would be a requirement that we're starting to think about that significant risk where perhaps the parents don't want to do it. Because if you're thinking it, then it was an expectation that a normal person or a normal parent would be thinking of doing it as well. So I guess the point around all of that is trust your instincts. If you think something should be happening, then generally speaking, then it should be happening. So it's all about us understanding that sort of process. The third one is something that we don't really need to worry about in early childhood. It's basically that when a child's of an age where they have to attend school, parents have to make sure that they attend school. Now, I just want everybody to understand and keep that in mind, because we are going to talk about that when we look at the forms around and what you're mandated to report. Now, what I'm basically getting at is that your mandatory reporting does not just relate to the child that attends your service. It also relates to their siblings, because basically what the government kind of saying to you is that if it's happening to the child, if it's happening to another child in the family, it's likely to happen to the child in your service. So if we've got a 4-year-old attending your service and we know the 7-year-old hasn't been enrolled, their sister hasn't been enrolled in school and is just at home with mum and coming to and from the service and never going to school, then we would fall under that, where we should be advising the government of that, and that becomes significant harm because it's within the family environment. So it's important that we kind of understand those processes. Obviously, we have where a child is at risk of being physically or sexually abused or ill-treated. And I guess it's really important that we understand that whilst that sounds quite simple for us to understand, the sexual abuse is, the ill-treatment, that can happen in various ways. That could be being burnt with cigarettes. They could being made to do things that are inappropriate, all of those sort of things. But when it comes to physical abuse, it's really important that we all understand that as educators, you're all going to form some really different opinions around that. The biggest one that we often see happening is where, you might have two educators who have completely different views on things. So if I was to ask you a question now, I might get everybody to just think about this and reflect on it for a second. Are parents allowed to smack their children in New South Wales? So I guess if I were standing in front of you, I can guarantee you that I would get different answers. I would get some people saying no. I would get some people saying yes. I would get some people saying they're okay to smack them between this part of their body and this part of their body. They're not allowed to do this, but they're allowed to do that. It's really important that we understand that when we talk about you as an individual working in your industry, we need to, as much as possible, take away your personal subconscious and always making sure that you're being driven by your professional subconscious. And so what I mean by that is that we all have our personal beliefs around parental discipline. That needs to be parked, and we need to know what our organization's expectation is around physical harm. Now, if that's not in place, I definitely know that your organization is definitely working towards some fine-tuning of some of your policies and procedures to make sure that we understand that. But I guess it's really important that we understand that if a child sits on an educator's lap and says that I was smacked on the bottom last night because I threw a rock at my brother, different educators will hear that differently straight away, and instantly their concern levels will be different. It needs to make sure that what we need to do is apply it to our professional framework, not to our personal framework. And I guess that's really important for us to make sure that everybody understands that. And they're the kind of things that we're hoping from this training that we can start to embed right across the organisation. Incidences of domestic violence and consequences of a child or young person is at risk of serious physical or psychological harm because of domestic violence. Now, I guess that's easier said than done when we talk about children under the age of 5. The realisation is a lot of the children that you have in your service, if they've been exposed to domestic violence, a lot of the times it's something that's happened since they were very young, and it becomes very normalised for them. So as an educator, how do we determine what effect it's actually having on a child physically or psychologically, unless they're telling us that one of their parents hit them whilst they were in a fight with the other parent? It's really difficult for us to assess that psychological harm. And I guess some of the things that we want you to remember around that is, again, your personal subconscious will definitely kick in. Everybody has their different opinions around, what they see as acceptable behavior between parents, what's not acceptable, swearing around children, not swearing around children, yelling around children, not yelling around children. All of those sort of things can be seen as different levels of domestic disturbance or potential violence in a home. And it's really important, again, that as an educator, we park that personal and we're thinking about our professional response that our organisation expects us to have. Now, I guess the easiest way for you to determine when a child does something or says something in front of you and you're determining what type of psychological harm is it having on them, we need to understand that if children have seen it a lot and it becomes normalised for them, we're looking for it to affect their normal behaviour. So what I mean by that is that you'll definitely have children in your organisation who become upset when they're not getting their own way. And they become aggressive about it. You might have a 3-year-old who not only chucks tantrums, but when they want something, they'll hit the other child or they'll whack them and want something from them. It's really important that we understand that that doesn't necessarily mean that actions is that they've been exposed to domestic violence, because we know that it can be just normal responses for them when they're not dealing with their behavioural keys, and they're also overstimulating, so they're struggling to deal with those sort of behavioural issues. But what we do know is that we're definitely looking for language that they use. So what I mean by that, if the child's hitting another child because they want the block and the other child won't give it to them, they're going to hit them, but they're going to use age-appropriate language. So they're going to say, give it to me, it's mine, I had it first, give it to me. If they're doing stuff like that, then that's very age-appropriate processes for where we can be pretty confident that it's all around that overstimulation and not dealing with their body triggers. But if the child automatically goes into adult context, so they start hitting the child and say, give it to me, you piece of F and S and all of that sort of stuff, then very quickly we know that that's not age appropriate. So remember, we always want to make sure that we're clarifying, because as educators, as soon as your child does something or says something in front of us, our subconscious again kicks in and we start going, I know what that is, I've heard it all before, I know mum and dad fight, so it must have got it from them. It's really important that we clarify with children by just asking where they hear that. those words from when they say them, just so we can gather that information and make sure that we're on the right track about where they actually remember they get it from. So it's important that we have those processes in place. And if we have that in place, then that's allowing us to decide whether it's actually significant harm that we're dealing with. The second last one there is a parent or caregiver's behaviour towards a child causes risk of serious psychological harm. Now, I guess the big triggers for you to remember around that is that 99% of your parents, as soon as they walk into your service, do not show you their normal parenting ability. Because as soon as they walk into your service, they all want to be seen as wonderful, loving parents in front of you. So, you know, they're going to be of their best behaviour. And so if they start using language or derogatory comments towards their child in front of you, I can tell you that they've toned it down 10 times and they think they're still being wonderful. There is one place at your service where you're going to see parents display their natural parenting ability, and that's in your car park. So it's really important that we understand that, you know, visuals and understanding that we still have to have responses, whether it's happening within our service or outside, or if a child starts telling us about things that are happening at home and they're getting called names and those sort of things, they're the kind of triggers that we're looking for around that emotional trauma process. And again, just a bit like we spoke about, if we knew of a sibling that was old enough to go into school and they're not registered to go to school, it'd be likewise if we know that we have a mum who has a 3-year-old at our service and she's now pregnant, and we believe that you know, that mum's perhaps not engaging with support through pregnancy, you have concerns around alcohol and drug use, then that would fall into that risk of significant harm for the unborn. And that's where we would be falling into that scope of being a mandatory reporter to make sure that we're reporting that. Now, when we talk about mandatory reporting, there's a couple of processes that we want you to understand. The first one is all about you understanding that we want you to talk to your management. Now, what we mean by that is that the Act allows us to communicate with colleagues, but the way you safeguard that is that if you ever have a concern around a child, we want you to talk to your supervisor. Then your supervisor can engage anybody else at the service that they believe might have information for them. That might be the educators that were on opening and closing, the educators who float through the room. It might be educators in the other room that have engagement with that child during outside play. It's all about us understanding that we can still gather information from other people, even though those people weren't aware of the situation. And we can share with other educators what's happening to ensure that we're protecting the child. Okay, so this thing around confidentiality, where the only people that can know about it is the educator and the manager, isn't true. What we want to make sure, but it's management that's driving the connection to any other educator. It's not the educator then running off and talking to 5 other educators before they go to management with their concern. Just always remember that we follow our processes, and we're also safeguarding you by making sure that you do that and understand that. Now, when we talk about reporting, it's important that we first understand some of the key points that we spoke about. So the first one is around the grounds arising during the course or from a person's work. So just remember that your duty of care to the children that attend your service start and finish from the time that they're enrolled to the time they're unenrolled, not from the time they sign in the morning to sign in the afternoon. So basically what it means is that if you become aware of a reasonable grounds of significant risk to a child that's happening outside of your service, or you see it happening on the weekend, or somebody tells you about it when you're at the footy on the weekend, then those grounds arise from the course or from the person's work or your role. So there's an important process there where you need to make sure that you're talking to management when you get to work about those concerns, or if they're really urgent concerns, then you're thinking about reporting as well as a mandatory reporter straight away, even though you're not at work. So it's important that we understand that. Usually it doesn't happen too often, but it's important that we understand those processes. Now, when we're talking about reporting, it's important that we use some really important processes. The first one is obviously, if anything's actually happening at your service and you believe it's put anybody's risk at danger. So whether it's a child or educators at risk at your service. So parents might be having a domestic in your foyer. Somebody might be at your service that's not supposed to be there to collect a child. Or you think that somebody might be coming there that's going to be mentally unstable or anything like that. It becomes a police issue because it's an immediate safety issue. We want you to ring 000. If it's not that and the child's safe with you, so let's say that you've become aware of something or a child's made a disclosure to you, but the child's safe whilst they're with you, and we've got time before anybody comes picks them up, or we don't have a process where anything's urgent, then we want you to always make sure that you're going through management, and then management at your service will then utilise our OAC incident support line, who again will support us in making sure that we gather everything that we need to before we start going to the child protection helpline or ringing them to either enter in the details through the Child Story Reporter website or verbally over the computer, over the phone. Now, either way, I just want to make it really important to everybody. If you actually do ring, because there's a little bit of urgency around it, always make sure that you follow up by either still reporting the e-report, still furnishing an e-report, or furnishing an email and sending it through to them. Just remember that whenever you talk to somebody over the phone from any government department, you're talking to an individual. And so you're relying on the individual actually understanding what you're verbally telling them. And we know that sometimes people will take different views from something they hear verbally over the phone, or sometimes it's really difficult to express exactly what you're trying to get across over a phone. So it's really important to safeguard both the child and yourself, is that if we ever report through the helpline over the phone, that we then make sure that we follow that up either through the Child Story Reporter website, or we follow that up with an email just outlining what your concerns were, so they clearly have that on record, and there'll be no going back and forth that that's not what you said on the phone, all of those sort of things. So it's important that we have those processes in place. Now, the child story reporting is a very easy process to use. If you have never gone to the website, please make sure that you go to the Child Story Reporter website and have a look at it. Yes, the majority of the time it will be management doing that, or it will be somebody else filling those out because of your concern, because you're going to be on the floor with the child. All right, but it's really, really important that we understand that, as a professional working with children, it's something that I'm going to reiterate now over the next hour, is about you understanding that as a professional, you have a responsibility to keep up to date with what's happening and your responsibilities. It's not just management's responsibility to remind you to attend training, to read policies and procedures. You have a responsibility to also do that personally as a professional. So it's important that you're taking those steps responsible yourself by always making sure that you're keeping up to date with your policies and procedures, but you're also making sure that you're visiting the Department of Child Safety website regularly, the Child Story Reporting website regularly, and making sure that you're keeping up abreast of any changes or concerns or any processes that you should be aware of. So it's really important that you understand that. Okay, so that's basically mandatory reporting, and I guess what we want you to understand is that if you use your internal processes of making sure that you're always speaking to your supervisor over any issue, whether minor or otherwise, then basically it will help you go through a process, okay? You're not making those decisions by yourself and risk missing something that you should be reporting. So it's important that we understand that. Now, the New South Wales, there's other legislative requirements that are placed upon you around child protection. The first one is the Crimes Act, and then we have the Child Safe Standards and the Reportable Conduct Scheme. So we're just going to have a look at them quickly for you to actually make sure that you understand them. And I'll point out some key points around that. Now, the first couple of things that we need you to understand is that from the Royal Commission into Institutional Abuse that we saw happen nationally, each state government looked at bringing in some legislation to strengthen about when people should be reporting. So basically what they've done is that they've ensured that anybody working in any place or an individual adult, that if they become, if they believe that a child is suffering serious physical abuse or sexual abuse, they must report it to the police. Now, the reason they brought that in is because, remember I was speaking about mandatory reporting, that sometimes in your service, it's the educators that are mandatory reporters, but the actual administration officer, your CEO, your board, the bus driver aren't. They don't have to do things. And so basically what this act does is basically saying that all adults now have the responsibility to report issues to the police, so they can't hide them. So what we saw through that commission was sometimes a church who, or a sporting organisation or a private school received information that one of their managers might have been doing something inappropriate around a child, and rather than reporting it and risk the tarnishing of the brand of that organisation, they moved the person on, or they moved the person into another role so they didn't have access to children. People can't do that anymore. So it's basically telling us that we have to report it. And then the second part is all about us sitting on an organisation. So boards have to make sure that things get reported. If they're not reported, they're actually committing offences as well. So it's all about just putting safeguards in there, and those safeguards then also protect you, all right? Now, in New South Wales, we saw the introduction of the Child Safe Standards at the beginning of last year, and it's really important that you all understand, again, what I spoke about before, that it's your responsibility as an individual educator to make sure that you understand the Child Safe Standards and that you're supporting your organisation in implementing and practicing them every day at your service. Every one of your services, when you go in, will have a public commitment hanging in your foyer. Now, I challenge you, the majority of you, to actually write on a piece of paper now what that commitment says. And a lot of the times what I see educators doing is not being able to write down anything. It's really important that you understand that if your organisation is making a public commitment to child safety, at least you should know what that commitment is and have some sort of idea about, if somebody wants to talk to you about that, that you understand what that is. I mean, basically the Child Safe Standards is all about us making sure that we have strong child-centric reporting processes and investigation processes, that every child in your organisation has a voice. You know, we understand the importance of us keeping children safe, but also understanding that things that we can do properly will ensure children remain safe. So things like active supervision, our guiding children's behaviour principles, will ensure that children don't become traumatised by our behaviour or our lack of supervision. So it's all about us understanding those processes. Obviously, the Child Safe Standards also talk about everybody having to make sure that you have a working with children card, and people are doing checks, and your interviews when you're taking on your jobs are child-centric in the way that the interviews are conducted to identify anybody that perhaps may not be suitable in working with children. And there's also a real important process now that if you are going to start in your organisation, the induction process is really important that you take it seriously. So if you're new to the service and you're asked to make sure that you become aware of policies and procedures and code of conducts, that you really understand what they're saying for you. It's easy for you to sign it, but do you actually remember what it actually said that you are making a commitment to? So again, it's really important that all of you take the time to revisit that and understand what your organisations are expected around that. Now, from the Child Safe Standards, we also saw the introduction of the Reportable Conduct Scheme in New South Wales. Basically, the Reportable Conduct Scheme is just about us understanding that if somebody does make a complaint around an educator in certain circumstances, so there's the Children's Guardian Act identifies what we talk about, what may be a reportable conduct. So if that's sexual offences or sexual misconduct or ill treatment of a child, or an assault against a child. So if an educator smacks a child, pinches a child, pushes a child over, all of those sort of things fall under this the reportable conduct scheme. And so basically what it means is that if you're on opening as an educator and a parent comes in and says, my child said last night that the educator pulled their hair yesterday in class, and you go, oh no, I was there when that happened. They just got their brush caught in the child's hair and it looked like the child would have thought that they pulled their hair, but it was actually just a knot in their hair. Even though you might explain to a parent it was an accident, because the parent has raised a concern, a potential around an assault, then you still have to make sure that you're advising and filling out appropriate paperwork and making sure that your management are following reportable conduct processes to ensure that there's a transparent process around the investigation. It's not something that we've just dealt with, all right? Or it might be, we've seen incidences where a parent might have raise a concern around another educator, and the educator that spoke to the parent goes, listen, I know that educator, I'll have a chat to them, I'm sure there was a reason for it, and we try and keep it all informal. Just remember that if it's anything to do with something that falls under a reportable conduct offence, as an educator, you cannot do that. You need to make sure that you're going through a process. So the easiest way to ensure that you're doing the right thing and we don't get anybody in trouble, specifically yourself or the organisation, is that if a parent or anybody ever raises a concern with you around a child, around another educator's behaviour or dealing with a child, then always make sure that we're transparent and we're bringing that to our supervisor's attention. So then there is a transparent response, and if we do need to respond through the reportable conduct scheme, it is done so accordingly. It's really important that we do that because it safeguards everybody. Now, that's all I basically needed to talk about state legislation. I hope everybody's still awake. And so for the next little bit, we're just going to have a look at the federal legislation. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but there are some really important tools and processes that I need you to understand. Now, we talked about mandatory reporting, which is all about when we should report concerns, okay, whether we're reporting internally, externally, whether we're asking for help or not asking for help. It's all about us reporting, okay? When we talk about your Education and Care Services National Law Act and regulations, it's all about what we do after we find out about a concern. So the big sections that we want you to understand around that is two sections. One is section 167, which basically says that every educator has a requirement that you need to take all reasonable precaution to protect a child from harm or any hazard that causes or likely to cause injury. Now, when we talk about harm can be caused two ways, accidentally and non-accidentally. So when we talk about accidental harm, you have a lot of things in place. You do first aid training, anaphylactic training, you have checklists in the morning, all of those sort of things. We're making sure the place is safe all the time to ensure that we're taking a reasonable precaution to make sure a child doesn't accidentally hurt themselves. But we also have harm that's done that's non-accidental, so it's done on purpose, which usually is child abuse, and usually that happens outside of our service. But when we become aware of it, we need to make sure that we're taking all reasonable precaution now to protect the child. Now, that might mean that we're doing strong observations of the child to make sure that we're not seeing changes in behaviour because of what they've been exposed to. Or it might be that a parent tells you that they're not going to leave that child alone with the other parent because of the concerns around their physical. And then we need to make sure that that's still happening. You know, we're going to do strong meet and greets with the family. We're going to make sure everything's all right. It's all about us understanding that the section of 167 is all about, it doesn't matter what it is. If you become aware of it, it doesn't matter how minor it is. Documenting isn't just our only role, or telling our management about it isn't our only role. Our role as educators in the room is ensuring that, what do I have to do now to make sure that we're checking in to make sure that the child's okay after I'm aware of that. Okay, so it's all about doing those check-ins, making sure everything's okay, thinking about strategies and activities that we can do with the child to support them. All right, so it's important that we understand that. The other section is the most breached section. It's actually not on the page there, but it's section 165 of the Education and Care Services National Law Act, which is around breaches of active supervision. It's the most breached section of the education and care services nationwide now by educators. So it's really important that we understand that when we talk about child safety and child protection, active supervision has a huge component in that. All right, so it's important that we understand that. Now, when we talk about national processes, the other things that have come in is obviously our national model code. The two big things that most educators think about when we talk about the national model code is we're not allowed to have phones on us when we're on the floor. And the second is that we're not allowed to have smartwatches on us when we're working as well, okay? Now, what we're seeing is that smartwatch process being a little bit lazy in services. It's really important that you understand that the actual national model code says we can't use them. So it's important that we understand that. When we talk about images, it's also about us understanding that we need to, not just about you guys not having things on us, we need to make sure that we have processes that are in place. So the first one that we want you to understand is around making sure that we have policies and procedures that parents understand that they shouldn't have their phones out or using them whilst they're in the service as well. If you're not allowed to have yours taken because of the risk of taking photos and videos, then anybody that visits our service shouldn't have theirs out as well. We need to make sure that any images, that videos that we're taking of children, we have an approval process to ensure that the videos or what we're sharing with parents hasn't got something in it that shouldn't have it. So we don't want to just see educators in the room taking photos and then sharing them with parents straight away without that photos being vetted by management first or having a supervisor look at them. You know, it might be that the educator missed a child in the background with their legs spread open, you can see the underpants, or something that somebody might take as inappropriate. It's important that we understand that we need to have that in place to ensure that not only are we protecting the child, but again, we're protecting you guys. So it's important that we understand that. Now, the last little piece of legislation that we just need to talk about is just making sure that you guys understand our duty of care. Now, our duty of care basically talks about that once you're a professional, there's an expectation that you can work with children and you also can protect children better than most people within our community. So if somebody in the community hears about something that happened at an early childhood centre or you become aware of, the general public's expectation is that you've dealt with it very well because you're trained and you're a professional in that area. So it's important that we understand that, because if you don't do that, then it becomes a breach of your duty of care. And what does a breach of duty of care affect? Well, it basically will affect your working with children card. And the realization is that if you don't have that, you cannot work in the industry. So, and if somebody's taking you civilly or suing or anything like that, it will impact that working with children card. So it's really important that we're understanding those processes. When we talk about the principles of duty of care, it basically says that you owe that duty of care not just to the child that attends your service, but also parents, siblings, and your community. So we know that your early learning years framework and our national quality standards quite often refer to those three key terms: child, family, and community. And it's really important that we understand that that's why. It simply is that you're dealing with very young children. So if the family's not right, the support provided to that family's not right, then the child is always at risk. So it's important that that's why we need to make sure that our focus isn't just on the child, it's also about supporting families in our community to ensure that the child has been supported in every different situation that the child enters into. The law says here, you're an expert, so there's an expectation that as an educator, you're taking the time to understand what you need to know. And that's what I was talking about before. Your professional learning and your professional keeping up to date isn't just solely on the responsibility of your organisation to provide you. You have a responsibility to self-learn and self-keep up with your expectations as well, okay? So it's important that we understand that. All right, I think so it's important that when we talk about your duty of care, again, you need to make sure that you understand your child safe environment. So there's policies that only about children have in place, and the key focus areas is all about you understanding your expectations, what you should be doing if you come across an incident, an injury, or trauma to a child, or there's an illness to a child. what are your expectations are from only about children to ensure that you're doing everything effectively and discharging your duty of care. There's the interaction with children policy that you should all be aware of and fully understand what you are expected to do around children and how you prepare for that. And then also obviously our child protection policy. So you understand fundamentally what we should be doing to support children in our services. Now, there's no reason why you all aren't keeping up to date with that information. It's clearly available to you on your hub. And so it's up to you again to make sure that you're regularly on there, keeping up to date with any changes. And it will tell you on there very quickly when there has been updates or important information that you should be aware of. So again, take the time to understand that you have a responsibility to ensure that you're regularly on there and keeping abreast of any changes that may be happening or anything that you need to be aware of. Now, just quickly, we're going to have a look at those policies, those key policies that we spoke about. When we talk about child incidents, injury, trauma, or illness policy, there are some key points that we want all of you to understand. All right, so whenever there is a requirement that as soon as possible and definitely within 24 hours of the event of any incident, injury, or illness or trauma to a child, you must notify parents. So we don't want to see situations where something's happening to a child and where educators are making the decision where we're not telling parents. The realization is that your policy clearly outlines to you that whenever a child is in the event of any incident or they suffer any injury, illness, or trauma, doesn't matter how minor or how serious, you have to notify parents. It also says the national regulations also make it quite clear to you that whenever you come across an incident, injury, trauma, or illness, or you're dealing with one, you must record them and document them accurately and that they are stored correctly. So just for you guys to understand that anything around injury, health, trauma to a child actually has to remain and be available until the child turns 25 years of age. So it's really important that you follow the exact processes that your policy steps out and you're using the correct forms when you're doing that, okay? So keeping that information is stored correctly and easily transferable if it's required by a government agency. That information you have to do straight away. So when we talk about documenting, it should be your process as a professional that you're documenting as soon as possible after an incident. Yes, our policies and say at least within that 24-hour period, but I'm hoping that we all understand the importance of making sure that we document, and especially documenting things like conversations and those sort of things that will become, your memory will become very blurred about very quickly. So it's important that we understand that we're doing that very quickly. And again, understanding the forms that we should be able to report. So we know only about children have an incident, injury, trauma, and illness record form. So there is no reason why anybody on this training right now should not be aware of those processes, and you should not breach them by not doing it. So it's important that we understand that. Now, when we talk about your interaction with children's policy, it's really important that we understand some frameworks and processes around that, okay? So we're just going to have a look at what they mean for you. So when we're talking about key points of the children's interaction with children policy, the first one is encouraging children to express themselves and their opinions. So you can do that through various means. We can use artistic impressions. So we know that expressions through art, they're encouraged to express themselves through drawings, painting, sculpting, and other art forms. And this allows for them to visually represent what their emotions are. And it's really important that you understand that you're doing that. Music and movement is another really good way of children being able to express themselves. So music, dance, and movements provides children with the avenue to express emotions. They create stories. They can engage with their surroundings. So if you're doing something and you're making it fun, then they can engage with you. And when they engage with you, they feel safe. And then sometimes that will give them the ability to tell you anything or show you anything that they might not be dealing with very well, or something that they're scared to do or struggling to do. But it's about us making sure that once they feel safe, that's the underpinning thing. And so all of these sort of processes allow that to happen. Obviously, play and storytelling and reflections is a really, really important tool around that. And language and communication, again, is really, really important. We need to facilitate children's development through conversation, storytelling, and other activities that allow children, as they start to get older in your service, to express their feelings verbally. We don't want a child, because what we see in services is that we have children getting to 3 and 4 years of age, and their first response is still to cry. And that's just basically a perfect example of a child that's inability for them to express themselves verbally, even though they're of an age where they should be able to do that. So it's important that we understand that sometimes we need to think about our programming and how we're really allowing children to do that through our interactions as educators. The second key point is allowing children to undertake experiences that develop self-reliance and self-esteem. Now, the benefits of being able to do that is allows the children to, they start to understanding how they can self-express themselves. They build their own self-esteem, and they develop a sense of belonging by able to do that. When we talk about emotional, if they understand how they can safely express themselves, then we're actually developing social skills, and also allowing them to have a really good emotional well-being. So they actually understand that it's okay to express themselves. It's okay to share and understand what other people feel. But we have to be able to develop that through our interaction with children and how we teach them to do that. Cognitive development is really, really important. So, where we're doing reflection, critical thinking, and problem-solving activities with children, that allows them to start to cognitively develop how they deal with different situations. So thinking about how we set up our environment to allow children to self-reflect and, making sure that they're not overstimulating. So we're allowing them to self-regulate in their environment and being able to come up with ways of them dealing with situations without you solving it. So it's about how we do that and how we set up in our environment to do that a lot of the times. Number 3 is all about us. Sorry, guys, I've lost my little button that changes slides. There we go, we're back. We need to make sure that whenever we're talking with children, or anybody's talking to children, or children are talking to each other, that we're providing an environment where children feel safe, valued, and empowered to express themselves. And that's all about us understanding children's rights. All right. So I'm not going to read all of these to you. I mean, you can have a look at them while I'm talking. But it's really, really important that we understand that children need to be able to have a voice, and they need to know that they're going to be heard. And that right to be heard is all about them understanding that their feelings, ideas, cultural, religious, everything that they have an opinion on or a process on, they should feel comfortable and safe to be able to share that, where they're not being judged around those things. So how we do that is about us making sure that we're putting in processes that don't allow children to become isolated, alienated, or making sure that we've identified those children that perhaps are a little bit vulnerable, and what have we put in place to support them so their dignity and rights are always protected within your environment. We know that we have cultural diversity in Australia. We're one of the most multicultural countries in the world. And so it's really important that we understand that a lot of our planning that we're doing is about us understanding that. And again, as educators, you will have to do some research into some cultures. You will need to understand what the child's being exposed to at home around rights and processes that may go against what your feelings are, but that's a cultural process that the child's being exposed to. So they may do things in front of you that you might deem as not the right process, but we need to also understand where it's coming from and explain to the child the different environments they're in, not letting them know, thinking that their culture is wrong. So it's really important that we're coming up with processes to do that. And the only way that we can do that is, again, as a team, is doing our research, working with perhaps educators that come from different cultures, so we understand, because they will come with knowledge. So if we have an educator with an Indian background, or a Philippine background, or it doesn't really matter, or Aboriginal background, we need to tap into that to ensure that we're understanding, we're building a capacity and understanding as educators around how our interaction with children can very quickly, make them feel or question their identity. And it's really important that we don't have that happening in our industry. So when we talk about giving guidance and encouragement to children, it's really, really important that you all understand what that means. We need to make sure that children feel safe and feel respected. So we do that through what we were talking about before. So we're setting clear expectations and rules. We're encouraging children to make choices. We're allowing them to problem solve and solve conflict. But to do that, we also need to understand that we've got to put in some tools to help them do that. So if I can give you a bit of an example of what we would consider perhaps something where you should be providing a tool around, let's have a look at children that play outside. So let's say that you may have one swing in your play area, and every day there's children fighting over whose turn it is on the swing. And what we see is educators trying to solve that issue all the time. So we're not actually giving the children any tools to be able to deal with it themselves, because all we're doing is going in and trying to negotiate somebody's turn. It's all about us understanding that when we talk about guidance and encouragement, sometimes there needs to be some, physical and some visual processes to support children in doing that. So at the swing, I would think that you should have a table at the swing with a big hourglass on it, and beside it we have a red hat. So children know, and the way we teach children around the setting boundaries and setting the rules around the swing, and children know what they are, is that if somebody's on the swing, you have to go to the red hat, and then you have to turn the hourglass, and when the sand runs out, the person on the swing then lets you hop on and have a go at the swing. Now, obviously, it's not all going to go wonderfully like that, but if I'm actively supervising that area, then it allows me to then help the children self-regulate. So I can say to the child that's turned the hourglass, I can acknowledge how patient they're being and how they're waiting so nicely. And the child that's on the swing, I can get them excited about hopping off by saying, listen, how many swings can you get in before the sand runs out? It's all about understanding that what we're doing then is giving guidance and encouragement, but we're also letting the children to self-regulate it by using tools and strategies that we've put in place which are visual, and help them do that, because some children struggle with that. So it's important that we understand there's no use us saying to them, listen, you're going to have to wait your turn, because children in early childhood really struggle with time. And every time we use any word associated with time, so, if you say wait or 5 minutes or, it's nearly time or anything like that, children struggle with that because they don't understand what that means in your world. And so it overstimulates them very quickly. So it's really important that we understand those processes. So that's just an example of that when we're talking about guidance and encouragement. If I can give you another example where we see this sometimes breaking down a little bit, is especially in outside play where we're just watching children run from one activity to the other. We're actually not preparing children to enter into different environments and understanding that they understand the rules and expectations in that area. So if I was to give you an example of that, let's say that I'm at the fort and Michelle is in the sandpit. Now Michelle has 4 children in the sandpit with her. They're all having a great time with her. They're engaging and they're doing a wonderful activity and there's no problems. I'm at the fort and I've got Johnny. Now, Johnny's been an absolute handful for me. I'm constantly having to remind him about respecting and, not pushing and all of those sort of things on the fort. And all of a sudden, Johnny looks over to the sandpit, and usually what we see is the child just run over to the sandpit. And unfortunately, what happens is that when Johnny gets to the sandpit, Michelle didn't know that he's been a handful for me. He enters into the sandpit, and then there's an explosion. And we've caused that as educators, because what we've done is that we've allowed him to enter into an environment when he's already in a difficult behavior already, and he enters into another environment where he hasn't had clear expectations and rules set for him. And so he just does what a normal child will do. They'll think about themselves and what they want to do, and we have an explosion. So transitioning children is a really important tool around that interaction with children. I want children to understand, once that they understand transitioning, that the 3 and 4 year olds should know that if they want to go from the fort to the sandpit, they can do that. I'm never going to stop them, but they should say, hey, Nick, I'm going to go to the sandpit now and play. That gives me an opportunity to say to Johnny, mate, when you get to the sandpit, who are you going to say hello to? And he looks over and he goes, I'm going to say hello to Miss Michelle. Good boy. When you get over there, make sure you go over straight over and say hello to Miss Michelle. So when he gets over there, he goes, hi, Michelle, I'm here to play in the sandpit. Michelle can then say, oh, mate, where'd you just come from? And he goes, I came from the fort. So Michelle quickly looks at me as the educator at the fort, and I give her a big smile and a thumbs up, which basically means good luck. But then Michelle now knows that, hey, I really need to just ask Johnny, what are you going to do in the sandpit? What do you want to do? Explain to him what the other children are doing. And set up an environment where he's actually not going to fail in when he enters into that, and either are the other children going to become at risk. So it's all about strategizing when we talk about and planning around interaction with children. It's fine for us to say we're going to sit back and give guidance and encouragement to children, but we need to understand that it's your communication with each other and your planning that allows you to do that. And if you're not doing that, then you'd never do these things very well. So it's all about making sure you pull apart what your environment is and actually understand how we do that. Step 5 is what we were speaking about before. It's all about us, again, making sure that, we need to build good communication strategies with families as well. We need to understand the child's background, where they're at with their development, identifying different children in your room who's intellectually and their abilities to do things are at different levels. So then you can plan your activities. Don't set children up to fail. If you've got 2 children in your room that cannot sit still for 2 seconds, then don't expect them that they're going to be able to sit down on the mat while you read everybody a book. We know that they're going to cause problems for you. So what's our planning? We want to invite the children there, but as soon as they lose contact, well then, I've got to kind of think about, is this activity great for everybody? So I might break it up into short things. So I might have the children use it as my go-to. So I might get children to sit on the floor and I might just show them the book and ask them what do they think the book's about today from the front picture, and then we might hop up and go do something else. And then I might bring them back to them and just read them 5 pages and ask them what do they think is going to happen next, and then we go away and we come back again. It's all about using it as a tool of bringing children back and forth to you, but knowing that, hey, I've got children that can't sit still for any longer than 5 minutes. So there's no use me reading the whole book because I'm just going to have explosions. So it's all about us strategizing and how we're supporting children to be able to do that. But for that to happen, we need to have that background information. So it's important that we're taking the time to understand that as well. The key other points are creating an environment for inclusion of each child's needs. So again, what do we know about the child? It's not, remember, their needs change every single day. When we talk about having strong meet and greets with families, so when parents arrive in the morning, did we find out, has their child slept all right last night? Did they eat their breakfast? Because if they're tired or they're hungry, we know that that's going to change their behavior straight away. So I can't create an environment and for individually for each child unless I know those things. So, we need to not only just think about building a relationship with the child, but I also need to know each day what child I'm getting. And so, because each day your relationship's going to change with each child because their development changes, their needs change. So we need to stay on top of that by having good communication with parents when they arrive, and then good communication with children, getting them to explain to us how they're feeling, what they're doing. And yes, some of you might go, well, I'm in the nursery, I can't do that. But we can definitely be talking to parents a lot more in those situations, understanding, the child's night, how they're sleeping, how often they woke up, what feedings, how's their feeding been going in the last 24 hours. All of those sort of things are really important tools for you. In the toddler room, we need to be working closely with parents around teething and, when they're starting to pull themselves up and walk and all of those sort of things. We know that, we have to start thinking about our environments and how we're setting things up to support the child whilst they're going through those things. But we don't know that unless we're really communicating with families to understand that. The last policy that we're just going to highlight for you is about you understanding your child protection policy. Now, your child protection policy is all about us to make sure that you understand that there's an expectation that everything that you do is child-centric. So what we mean by that is about that you need to always listen to children. Don't question children, what they say to you. So we should always believe a child until proven otherwise. We all heard the boy that cries wolf story. It doesn't matter. Every time the child says it, we should believe it until proven otherwise. It's not something that we should go, oh, they've said that before. Oh, they're always saying that. It's really important that each and every time we're doing that we're identifying that there could be the child at risk, and we're taking steps to ensure that the child's safe, okay? And how we do that depends on the situation, but it's really important that we understand what that is. And I guess the big point too is if a parent comes in and tells you something, remember a parent is always going to believe their child. So if a parent comes in and says this happened and you want to go, oh no, it didn't really happen like that, then just remember that a parent's all of a sudden going to think straight away that you're trying to hide something, because they're always going to believe their child. So just always remember that when a parent tells you something, our job is to take down the information, let them know that we're going to talk to our supervisor about it, and we're going to look into it properly, and we're going to provide them feedback. It's not about us verbally starting to talk to them about, oh no, that's not really what happened. Your child just thought this and all those sort of things, because, it very quickly starts to look like we're not doing the right thing. And so it's really important that we strategize around that and we put things in place to make sure that it's very child-centric, okay? I just forgot to change the slide before I said that. Some of the other things that we need you to understand is that when children make a disclosure, or even if a parent wants to talk to you, it's really important that not only through what we do, it's also about how we set that up to obtain that information. So, when parents want to start to talk to us, it's also about making sure that we're open, so we're not standing there with our arms crossed, we're not hanging on to another child looking over there, all of those sort of things. It's all about, we're attentive, we're establishing trust by giving them the attention that they need. And it's the same if the child says something through to us, making sure that, we have safe spaces, children understand what they are. We use clear language with children, so it encourages them to make sure that they understand that, they can tell us things. And I guess what we're getting about that is just about how we react to things. So, if Johnny comes over to you and says, Billy took the pen off me. Now, we have to be really careful about how we respond to every time a child telling you that some other child did something to them or they took something off them, all right? Because we don't want to get that child into a habit where they think that they're going to come dog and you're going to solve the issues every single time, all right? But we also don't want you to, push them away and say, listen, we go sort of, don't dog all the time, all that sort of stuff. So it's important that we come up with processes that we always make sure the child feels safe. Acknowledge that the child's upset about it, acknowledge that, if there's anything sore, do they need a rub, acknowledge that it wasn't the right thing to do, and then talk to them about something that they might want to be able to use or do something differently. Yes, you might need to talk to the other child, but we're not going to do it with the other child standing beside you going, yeah, I told you you were going to get in trouble. It's all about us understanding that we have processes in place, but to do that, we need to establish all of those sort of things. And the way we do that is, again, making sure that as a team, we clearly understand those processes around having a process that children feel supported, that they're able to talk, and they're able to tell us anything that they need to talk to us about. And if adults want to talk to us, I guess that's why it's really important that we make it really clear to parents, especially during pick up and drop off. Sometimes we usually struggle with two different things. We'll have those parents that sort of come in and go before we're even there and we don't have a time. Or we have those parents who want to come in and they want to tell you their whole life story or hang around for half an hour or 45 minutes while you're trying to actively supervise children. Again, just remember that parents we need to set expectations with parents too. They need to understand what you want them to do when they arrive or when they come to pick up, and also letting them know that if they do need to speak to an educator about something, then just like if you need to speak to a parent, we ring them and let them know that there's been an incident or we need to speak to them when they come in the afternoon so a parent can prepare for that. We need the parents to understand they need to give you the same heads up as well, so you do have time to make sure that they have your attention or somebody's attention when they need to talk to them, not dropping on it when you're trying to deal with 3 or 4 other children and they're trying to talk to you about something. It's all about us just, if we have good communication with families and children, then those expectations and environments set themselves up naturally. But if we don't have them, again, it falls down, and it comes down to that effective communication strategy. So it's really important that as a team, we're discussing and coming up with that as much as possible. All right, so part of our processes is all about us just understanding how we deal with different types of abuses. So what we're going to do is that we're going to do a scenario where we're thinking about how we handle a disclosure. And then what we want you to do, I want you to think about is about, as a service or as an educator, what are going to be your responses to this scenario? So here's the scenario. Mary is 4 years of age. She's been coming to your service now for several years. She lives with mum and dad, lovely family, and you've never had any real problems with them. Mary arrives on Monday morning at 7 o'clock. She gives you a high five, says goodbye to mum, and she runs out and starts playing with the other children. You watch her for the next half hour, play with the other children in a normal way. She's running around, playing in the sand, doing all the things that she would normally do. After half an hour, she comes over to you and says she needs to go to the toilet. So she runs into the toilet and you stand at the door and she screams when she goes to the toilet. You go, "What's wrong, darling?" And she goes, "It hurts when I wee." And you go, "Why does it hurt when you wee?" And she says to you, "Because Granddad hurt me then." Now, I want you to think about what would be your response to that disclosure. Now, what I'm looking for is 5 clear steps that you would take. Now, what we want you to understand is a lot of the times when we're following our processes, it might talk about that, we need to document, we don't ask open, we shouldn't interview the child, we need to tell our management, all those things. But there are some clear steps that we need to make you always think about when a child makes a disclosure, just to make sure that we don't influence what the child's actually trying to tell us, or we mistake what the child's trying to tell us. And we also make sure that we're always putting the child first. So what I'm going to do now is that I'm just going to run through with you 5 steps that I would like you to take. Now, usually if we were doing this as a workshop, I would break you up and be able to do that. But obviously, it's a bit difficult with how many people we have online. So I'm just going to go straight into them and try and explain them for you. The first one is about us understanding the importance that whenever a child says something or does something, it's going to shock you. And what we apply is our big adult brain. And it's really important that sometimes what a child says to us isn't what we're thinking. So, when in that scenario I just gave you, when she said that Granddad hurt her, a lot of educators will be thinking straight away, I'm dealing with sexual abuse. This is really serious. All right. It's really important that we understand that there could be other reasons. It could have been that Granddad took the training wheels off the bike, he pushed her, she fell off the bike and hurt herself there. So Granddad hurt her there. She didn't give you the whole story. She just told you that Granddad hurt her there. It's really important that we understand that whenever a child says something or does something, we want you to clarify it. Now, what we mean by clarifying isn't about you all of a sudden going into open-ended, non-leading questions. I know when you're doing your study, it talks about that whenever you're dealing with reasonable suspicion of child abuse, we have to use open-ended, non-leading questions. Well, she's just told us that Granddad hurt her there. That's not reasonable suspicion of child abuse yet, because it could be an accident. So we just need to clarify. And I guess to show you what I mean by clarifying, that's what you naturally did. When a child screams on the toilet, we would go, "What's wrong, Dad?" Now, that's a very leading question. And she says, "It hurts when I wee." So we go, "Why does it hurt when you wee?" A very leading question again. You know, an open-ended questions would be, "Can you tell me a little bit more about that, please?" And if we said that to a child, they would look at you 3 times, or they take you around the world 3 times and still not give you the answer that you're after. So what we want you to do is just remember the clarifying. So when a child shocks you with something, try and think of that one question that's going to clarify what you're thinking. So when she said granddad hurt her there, you would have all taken in a deep breath and go, "Oh no, I need to ask a question." So my question is, how did granddad hurt you there? If she gave you the bike story, which is an accident, you'd all go, "That's not what I was thinking, but thank you for telling me that." But if she goes to you, "Granddad put his fingers down my pants and hurt me," then we don't have to ask any more questions. I don't have to worry about open-ended, non-leading questions or interviewing a child, which I'm not supposed to be doing, because I've clarified what she meant by what she said to me, and now I have reasonable suspicion that I'm dealing with sexual abuse. That is my job when it comes to knowing about it. I don't need to know anything more about it. All right, anything else we need to know about it, we can come back and ask the child, but let's not ask too many questions where the child has to relive everything. So it's really important that we understand that clarifying process. Step 2 is all about us understanding that everything, once a child does say something, so as soon as we go into that reasonable suspicion of abuse, which we've done, she told us that granddad put his fingers down her pants and hurt her, then I go into child abuse mode. So it's not about, I've got to go tell my manager straight away. It's all about, I've got to make sure the child's okay. So child safety and health is just a process. So safety is all about you going, okay, it's 7:30 in the morning. No one ever picks up Mary until 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Is she safe with me? And the answer is yes, she's safe. So that means that I don't have to deal with everything in 5 seconds flat. I can give the person that deserves my attention until they're okay, and that's the child, okay? Then what we can do is do that health check. You know, do we need an ambulance from what Mary's just told us? Well, I know I've watched her play outside for half an hour. She's run around doing her normal things. She's gone to the toilet. It's done when she weed, but she settled really quickly afterwards. I would suggest that we don't need like that big urgent ambulance or anything like that, unless we saw something we didn't like, and that would usually be discharge or blood. So we don't want to do, you know, personal checking and all of that. But what we can do is ask the child when they're finished to stand up and not flush the toilet. You can look in the toilet. You could help the child get dressed and just have a look to make sure there's nothing in the toilet. It's all about just doing something that's age appropriate but not intrusive. All right. Thankfully, in this situation, we don't see anything like that. So we know that it was sore in that area when she weed, but it's not affecting her normal behavior or her ability to play. It just stung when she weed. So that's what we basically know. Okay. So then we have, what's the next thing to do? So the next thing to do is make sure that we understand, well, you're still in the toilet. And that might sound a little bit funny that we need to get out of the toilet. But can I just tell you that transitioning the child is one of the most important things you will ever do with a young child when they make a disclosure. And what I mean by that is that we need you to understand that 9 times out of 10, what the child has said to you and where you've taken it to in your mind is nothing where it is with the child. Remember, Mary is 4 years of age. She has absolutely no idea what sex or sexual connotations are. In her world, she has just told you, it triggered to tell you that granddad hurt her there, just as if granddad had pulled her hair, pushed her off the bike, pinched her, smacked her. It's just that instant thing where something hurt, it reminded her to tell you that that's what happened. Okay? That's it in their world. But you've taken it all the way up here. You're going, oh no, we've got possible sexual abuse. I have to get to management. This is really serious. It's really important that our response to the child is appropriate to them and to their age. Now, I know that during your study, it talks about comforting and reassuring the child, and some of the suggestions they give you is thanking the child for telling you and all those sort of things. Just remember that points like that is more for older children, like, you know, 12 and 13-year-olds, when they know what they've told you. Yes, we might say to them, thank you for trusting me and telling me, you know, who do you want to be with? who do you want to talk to, all of that sort of stuff, because it's age appropriate, because they understand what you've told them. Just remember, it's very quickly our response to a 4-year-old that can scare them very quickly. So it's really important that we take a breath and make sure that whatever we do is age appropriate. So in this situation with young Jane, there's 4 things that I think that an educator could consider doing. The first one is that we could ask her what she would like to do. She's been a bit upset. 2, I can keep her with me until somebody from the management team arrives, then take her with me to the management and tell them what's going on. 3, I can take my time now, make sure Mary's okay, get her laughing and smiling about what she was doing outside, and then reintegrate her back into normal day. All right, remember, it's us that's gone all the way up here. It's her's just told us something that somebody did to her. It's not hurting anymore. They're ready to go play. Or I can change the environment. I can bring other children inside with Mary and start doing some inside programming with her. So I'm going to change it up. So they're the 4 things that I think that an educator could do. Now, again, I would usually give you time to reflect and think about it, but obviously we're all over the place, so we can't do that. So I'm going to kind of give you some hints now. So the first one that I said was to ask the child what to do. Now, again, that's very age appropriate. In early childhood with 3 or 4-year-olds, if the 3 or 4-year-olds with an educator and they get a bit upset, we know they fight for one-on-one attention. So if you ask them what they would like to do, they're going to say, I want to be with you, I want mum, all of those sort of things, and that becomes really difficult for us to control. So what we want you to do is make sure you understand that we want you to control what happens, all right? We know that you can get children thinking differently very quickly. So it's all about us just using those skills to be able to do that. We definitely don't want to use number 2, where we isolate the child and keep them with us until management arrives, because you're going to scare the child. And 2, we don't want the child hearing what we're telling management, because that's just going to scare them even more, because they're going to think that they're in trouble, they're getting somebody else in trouble, all of those sort of things. So it's important that we don't do that. So our choices are, do we take our time to reintegrate back outside, or do we reintegrate with children playing inside? Now, for this situation, I would much prefer you doing inside than outside. Now, the reason being is that obviously we now have a child with a potential injury in her private areas. Outside, we have climbing, running, sand, dirt, jumping. It's definitely not my safest environment. So I'd rather her inside, playing inside environments, home corner, playing trucks, whatever it may be that she enjoys doing, but in a quieter, cleaner environment. So it's all about us just understanding that process. So once we've transitioned her and she's able to do those sort of things, it's really important that we understand that before we even think about, before management get there, or even if management's there, it's really important that we think about documenting the really important things really quickly before we forget about them. And I guess the number one thing I always want you to remember is that when it comes to documenting anything that happens with a young child or with an adult, it's all about making sure that you understand that the thing that you're going to forget really quickly is conversations. It's not date, it's not time, it's not where you are, it's not the child's name. Because I know when you're doing your study, it gives you documentation. It goes date, time, child's name, your name, where you are. That's the incident form. That's why that was created in services, so we don't forget the information or what we should be recording. But when we talk about initial documentation, it's all about, as quick as possible, we want you to write down the conversation. I just want you to grab a piece of paper in your room and quickly go, I said, she said, I said, she said, I said, she said, I said, she said. That way, when management arrives, or when you go to talk to management, you can go into management and we can be verbal. We can say, listen, Jane arrived at 7 o'clock, went and played for half an hour, and then she asked to go to the toilet, and I heard a scream, and you hand them what you've written down. It's so much easier for management to understand what's going on. It's a lot easier for you to handle because you're not verbalizing the things that made you upset. And then it's very easy for us to transfer that into the form. So, but if you're thinking about date, time, child's name, all of those sort of things, those things become very difficult sometimes. Because remember, you don't have your phones on you. So every morning at 7:30, how many of you know what date is? And so all of a sudden you're looking for things with dates and times, and all of a sudden Mary's surname is Malachevsky and you're trying to work out how to spell it. Whilst you're thinking about all of those things, your memory of the conversation is going. So always remember that whenever there's a disclosure made to you, as quick as you can, where you can grab something to write on what the child said or what the adult said or what the other educator said. Writing down that conversation is the most powerful tool that you will ever have when it comes to documentation. All right, because we know that you've got to document straight after with your manager and fill out the appropriate forms. So things like which child it was, where you were, what you heard, what you saw are not things that you're going to forget in that short period of time. That conversation is. So just be really, really mindful about that. And then we have the ability where we can report, okay? So based on the information that we have, then as a team, we can report. Now, those 5 steps will change which order we do it in, and it all comes down to that second slide where we're deciding child safety. So if the child made that disclosure at 3:45 in the afternoon and Grandad picks her up at 4 o'clock, well, then we would need to think about how we do things differently. I would need to call in another staff member and ask them to do the health check and transition the child whilst you quickly run out and verbalise everything to management, because then we'd have to ring OOO and get the police there because our place is going to potentially unsafe. But we're still making sure that we're doing those processes. So it's all about us just understanding and strategizing around that to make sure that we have those clear processes in place. All right, the last thing that we just need to make sure that we look at tonight is just all about the types of abuse. Now, before we just get into this last bit of tonight, just please don't leave the workshop early tonight. The last slide that I'll be putting up tonight is a code that I need you to take a photo on your phone, and that will allow you to register for tonight's training, okay? So we need you to make sure that you do that before you jump offline tonight, okay? So sorry, I forgot to bring that up at the beginning, but please don't leave tonight's webinar early until that code comes up and you've scanned it on your phone and your attendance has been acknowledged. And I'll leave it up for a bit just in case some people have to go get their phones. So don't worry about it if your phone's not on you at the moment. I'll leave it up for 5 minutes to make sure that people have the opportunity to grab it. All right, the last thing that we have to have a look at tonight is just about you understanding the 4 different types of abuse and what you may be coming across and exposed to see. So there's no use us now understanding what we should be reporting, when we should be reporting, the processes around making sure that we're doing everything right internally. We need to make sure that we understand actually what we're looking for. So when we talk about physical harm, it's really important that we understand that parents now know in our society that if they present a child to an educator that they have got bruises on them, marks on them, a whip mark, a belt mark, a wooden spoon mark, that they're going to be reported. So it's really important that we understand that some people still need to have that physical control around children. All right, so sometimes the most common types of physical abuse that we're seeing in early childhood is sometimes hand marks, usually under the arms, where parents are grabbing their children and ripping at them really aggressively. They're pinching them. All of those sort of things are things that we're seeing parents do to control their children. So again, sometimes now it's not about you looking for actual shapes or locations. It can be things really small. And it comes down to us making sure that we're visual around young children, and we're always listening to things they say, actions that they may do when they're playing in home corner, all those sort of things may identify to you that inappropriate things are happening when it comes to physical control by their parents at home. Okay, so it's important that we understand that. One of the big concerns that we see around physical abuse, and we've definitely seen an increase of reported shaken baby cases throughout Australia. Now, it really needs for you to understand what shaken baby syndrome actually is. 90% of educators tell me that that is shaken baby syndrome, okay? That is not shaken baby syndrome, all right? Whenever we see the word syndrome, it's a medical term about what's actually happened to the child. So basically, it's where not so much a child's been violently shaken, it's been about where the brain is violently shaken and hit the wall of the child's skull. So, and just be mindful what I'm about to say can be quite shocking to some, but It can be a parent that's punching a child repeatedly in the head, picking them up and throwing them across the room into a wall, picking up by their feet and smashing their head down on the change mat is usually the actions that we see that causes shaken baby syndrome. Now, when we talk about shaken baby syndrome, it's going to be extremely unlikely for an educator to be presented a child that suffered shaken baby syndrome because of the severe bruising, swelling of the head, detached retinas, all of those sort of things. So, but why we want you to be so aware of shaken baby syndrome is about some of the things that you can do as educators to really support families to make sure that these kind of incidences don't happen. Now, what I can tell you about shaken baby syndrome is that basically we know that about 95% of offenders of shaken baby syndrome are male. They're usually dad or mum's partner, and it always happens when they're alone with their child. Now, the realization is that we need to understand that we hear these things called maternal instincts, paternal instincts. There's definitely different levels of that. But one of the biggest things that we need you to understand is about actually what's happening in those households leading up to an incident occurring. And usually what happens is that we see that the male is left alone with the child for one of the first times by themselves, or they're getting left alone more often with the child by themselves. Now, what we mean by that is that we still know that in most households in Australia, when a baby's born, it's usually mums that take maternity leave still. So what we have, whilst mum's on maternity leave for 6 months or 12 months, we have dads walking around telling everybody what wonderful parents they are, how they change nappies, they get up in the middle of the night, they help their wife. But the realization is that they're actually being sheltered from actually looking after their child by themselves for long periods of time. And if they get up in the middle of the night, the child won't settle, they'll take the child to the mum, or mum will come out and help. Whilst mum's on maternity leave, the longest period of time that most dads look after their child by themselves might be an hour, when mum goes have a coffee with their friends or go get their hair done or goes does a bit of shopping. The realization is that dads do not spend very much time alone with their child during that short period of time when mum's on maternity leave. Then what we see is that the child being enrolled in early childhood just before mum goes back to work. And then when mum goes back to work, that's when we sometimes see that changing a little bit, where we see some dads spending a lot of time with their child by themselves. And because they're not prepared for it, that's when they see this snap and they do things that they regret for the rest of their lives. So it's all about us being aware of that. And I guess the biggest message that we want to give parents is for them to understand that they need to have support mechanisms when they're alone with their child, and the support mechanism isn't their other half. So what I mean by that is, let's say that you've got a mum going back to work, and mum's a doctor at your local hospital and she works in the emergency section, and her first week back at work, she's on 6P to 6As. So you're potentially having a dad now work all day, finish work, come into your centre, pick up the child, and go home for the first time having to have a whole week where he's got to get up in the middle of the night for his child and then not be so tired that he has to go to work, and then getting tighter and tighter as the week goes on. But what we see is that in that dad's world, if at midnight the child's not settling, his first port of call to ring to get help is his wife. Now, unfortunately, what we see is that mum's an emergency, and the chances of her being able to answer the phone is really slim. And then dad doesn't get the support when he needs the support, and then he snaps. So it's really important that some of the messages we can give to parents is about them understanding that support needs to come elsewhere other than just from each other all the time. When I had 3 young children, my wife and I, we used my mum as our support mechanism. She lived 2 suburbs away, and she's the biggest gossip of our family. She knows everything about everybody that's happening. If her phone rings, she always answers it. So she was a perfect person. So as soon as we asked her to go to, she got our rosters, she knew when we were working, and she would always check in on us and all that. And I knew that if I couldn't get one of the children to settle, or one of the children was sick and I needed a hand, I would ring her first, okay? And because I knew that she would always answer and either be able to talk to me or be able to come around and help me. It's all about us making sure that we help families strategize around that. Otherwise, we see things happening when They seem the most wonderful parents in the world, but all of a sudden one of them just snaps. And the more that we can do to support that doesn't happen, it's about us just providing them that information so they understand that. Now, sexual abuse is by far the least reported type of abuse in Australia, but it's the one that we all fear the most. And it's just really important that we understand that from our point of view is always making sure that you err on the side of caution. If you ever come across anything that you believe is sexual, we always make sure that we're speaking to our supervisors about it and making sure we're documenting it. And we're making sure that we're ensuring that we're taking all steps reasonable to protect the child from harm. I don't like to give scenarios and indicators because everything changes all the time. Just remember what I spoke about before. If you see a child do something or say something in front of you around and you believe it's sexual, just remember they're not going to change it, hide it, because they don't know what it is. If a child sees something, they're just going to mimic it and do it. If they're going to hear something, they're going to say it. So just remember, it should be fairly confronting for you. They're not going to change anything because they don't know what it is. So trust your instincts. If you see something that you don't like, or you go, I shouldn't hear that, or I shouldn't see that, then it's really important that we understand that we have mechanisms around that. Now, grooming behaviours, the realisation is that there is no industry that is immune to having some people work in the industry that shouldn't be in the industry. In early childhood, unfortunately, over the last 18 months, we've seen a couple of instances where we saw some educators being charged with offences where they've sexually abused children or groomed children in early childhood. I guess all we can do as educators is understand that the more systems that we have in place where we're dealing with children's behaviour, engagement, all of those sort of things the same, then what it does, it really picks up really quickly if somebody's not doing it. So if I can give you a perfect example of what I'm talking about. So let's say that I go to some services where I'll see educators, they'll put themselves on the ground, or they'll sit beside children, or they'll sit on a chair, and children just run up and jump on them, sit on them, roll over them, all do those sort of things. Now, I know that that's going to happen in nurseries and maybe in our toddler rooms a little bit, but when we're getting to pre-kindy and kindy, we need children to understand child safety, and you're trying to do that all the time with them. So you're telling children that if you want to pick them up, hang onto their hand, you're asking them before you do that. And even we're getting you to do that with children that want to change their nappy. We're getting you to ask if you can change the nappy. What we want to teach children is them understanding that they need to understand empathy and understanding that some people don't do things. So, not every educator at your service is going to be a hugger or a cuddler or like children jumping all over them. So it's important that we strategize around that. So children should be asking before they do things, can I sit on your lap, please? Can I give you a high, all of those sort of things. And an educator can then put themselves in a position where it doesn't look awkward, or if they don't want to give a hug, they can go, listen, how about a big high five at the moment? Or they can put themselves in a position where the hug doesn't look like the child's head's in their groin, all of those sort of things. I know it's not nice to think of, but the realization is that the more structure we have around how we engage with children and how we let children engage with us, it makes it really a lot easier for us to identify when perhaps an educator isn't doing the right thing. So again, it's important that we strategize around that a little bit. Now, emotional trauma is by far the most reported type of abuse we have in Australia. Nearly 50% of everything reported in New South Wales is emotional trauma, and the majority of that is children exposed to domestic violence. We know that in Australia at the moment, we know that 1 in every 7 homes in Australia has some sort of domestic violence order attached to it. And we know that Australia has the highest divorce rate than any other westernised country in the world. So the realisation is that home environments are under stress in Australia, and because of that, children are being exposed to domestic violence, parents screaming and yelling at each other, physical abuse, all of those sort of things. So it's really important that indicators can come from all different shapes and forms from young children. Again, it's just all of us being aware of, again, what I spoke about before when I was talking earlier about age-appropriate behaviour is a really big key for that, because children will mimic what they hear and see. So, hitting's really hard to pick up on whether it's age-appropriate or not, because children in early childhood will hit each other, they will bite each other, they will do those things because they get frustrated and overstimulated. But the wording and the vocabulary they use around that should be very age appropriate. It shouldn't all of a sudden be adult words. So they're the kind of things that we're looking for. Or in changes in child's behaviour can indicate that perhaps things are changing at home that are scaring them. So if you have a child that comes and sits on your lap and tells you that mummy and daddy had a fight last night and it scared them, well, that child's clearly telling you that they haven't seen it very often before, and that it's something that's escalating. So from our perspective, it can be something that we can look at early intervention strategies around, all of those sort of things. And it doesn't have to be just that. It could be a child telling you that their older brother or sister's running away from home all the time. That's telling you that there's things at home that aren't quite right, and the child's being exposed to that. So that could trigger those emotional things. You might have a parent yelling and screaming at their child out in the car park every afternoon. Again, we know that when parents are stressed, their tolerance levels around their children shrink and they do things that they shouldn't do. So it's all about us being really mindful of that and understanding how we respond to that. Now, when we talk about neglect, it's really important that we understand there's 4 different types of neglect. The first one's that physical, and I spoke about that earlier, where we spoke about understanding that, children, families are allowed to live the way they want to live in Australia. So, it's okay if the child's a little bit dirty or they're not being bathed all the time, or they talk about food that you don't think is really appropriate, all that sort of stuff. They have to be suffering something for it to be neglect around that physical processes, okay? Educational neglect is what we spoke about earlier, about if a child's not going to school. But when we talk about emotional and medical neglect, just remember that we have mental health issues with some parents. I mean, we've seen a parent in Queensland, a mum who's just been charged with a whole heap of offences where she was an influencer on TikTok. She was setting up GoFundMe pages for her sick child, but she was the one that was poisoning her child to get her child sick so she could use it for the influencing and the GoFundMe. So again, people's mental health can cause and do things around a child that put them at risk. So it's all about us understanding that. We all talk about drugs, alcohol, all of those sort of things, but remember the mental health is still one of the biggest concerns that we have in our society, and that can be through bipolar and all of those sort of things as well. It can be a mum that has postnatal depression, all of those things. So it's really important that you're not only just aware of what perhaps one parent's problems are, but you're really understanding if the other parents are around and supporting. That, because they're the questions that the government's going to ask you. If you ring up and you want to report a mum that's postnatal depression and she's telling you that she wants to hurt her child, if you report that to the government's going to want to know, is there another parent in the household? Do you have concerns about that other parent? Because the parents are actually acting protectively by the child coming to you during the day whilst that parent's working. And then if that parent's at home, the government's going to think that a parent that's at home is going to support their other parent whilst they're going through that. So it's all about us just knowing the family environments and knowing what supports in place is a really, really important tool when it comes to having positive responses around neglect. All right, that's brought us to the end of tonight. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us. Now, if anybody has any questions, please make sure you type them into the chat room. Now, I'm going to put up this QR code and I'm going to leave it up here for the next 5 minutes. But in the meantime, if anybody has any questions that you would like to ask, please do so by typing into the chat room, and I will answer them. But once you've scanned the QR code, and if you have no questions, then thank you so much for joining tonight. I hope everybody takes something away from tonight, and hopefully this will be the start of some really good training that's coming from your organisation in responding to keeping children safe whilst they're in your care. Thank you, everybody.